This is the Infosec Sidekick podcast.
What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining us today on another episode of the Infosec Sidekick podcast. I'm Travis Romero, your host, and this is a podcast all about making you the hero of your career. We're just the sidekicks. We're just here talking about our careers, talking about the success we've seen, the failures we've had, hoping you can learn from it and advance your career in the cybersecurity space. So with all that being said, I'm really pumped again about episode 3. We've had 2 really good episodes so far. I hope you've enjoyed them. And so we're going to jump right into it. Episode number 3, we're talking with an incident response consultant. So we're getting out of the sales world of the past 2 episodes and jumping into the incident response world with a friend of mine, Mike Childers. He has kind of seen it all, working at both internal security teams and now working with some pretty big name vendors. So I'm really happy to have him on. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Thanks for having me. I'm pretty pumped to be here. It's a passion of mine to kind of help give some advice and help get more people into security. So definitely stoked to be here, man. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And real quick, I guess just a quick intro. What do you do right now for a living?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually a principal incident response consultant at Crowdstrike. Pretty new to that team, but I've been in the incident response consulting field for at least the last 4 years. And I work remotely here in San Diego, so not too far away from yourself.
Nice. So I guess in your role, you know, remote work isn't all out of the normal, but today we're all doing that, right?
Yeah.
So, actually, real quick sidebar question. You're still traveling?
No,
No. Okay.
With the incident response consulting, most of what we can do is remote. So I was primarily remote before, like pretty much for the last almost 5 years, it's been just fully remote work. The only time that we need to go on site is if we're doing a lot of times if I'm assisting with some proactive engagements like a purple team assessment, that's when we'll go on site. But for most incident response work, we do all that remotely anyways. So not too affected here. It didn't really break my rhythm here with the COVID stuff going on.
That's good. That's good. Awesome. Yeah, just came into my mind, so I figured I'd ask you. I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into, the lifestyle of the consultant and your incident response background.
Yeah.
But let's jump right into it. I want to talk about your career. I think it's a fascinating topic. So let's start from the beginning, man. What was your first step into technology that, got you all started on your path to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I think we need to go back in time to about 2006, 2007. I started getting an interest just in building PCs, as I think a lot of people that work in tech kind of started. And I wanted to basically fix computers for a living, or so I thought at the time. And so I pursued getting a position with the Geek Squad in one of the Best Buy stores in Tampa, Florida. And so that's kind of where I started doing basically IT support. And I did that for a couple of years actually. And, without me knowing it, I was doing a lot of security related stuff that, later on, several years down the road of my career, when I finally became kind of smart to what I was actually doing. But one example is we had several clients or customers bring in their computers because they were infected with viruses. And as part of doing like virus cleanup, I was doing things like I knew that this particular piece of malware created like registry keys and certain places, and I didn't know what they did, but I know that if I didn't delete them, that the malware would still run on the system. There were also like auto runs folders where the malware executables would be located in, and I knew I would have to delete those in order to keep the malware from popping up again when I rebooted the computer. So even without me knowing, I was there like kind of dealing with malware persistence, and I had no idea what that was back in 2007. But you flash forward to a decade down the road, I do that regularly, and I know what that is. Um, so I started a Geek Squad. I quickly became tired of that. You're dealing with dozens of customers a day that are upset because their computers aren't working, and I eventually ended up taking a position at Sony in one of their retail stores in the Tampa, Florida area, because they were starting a program called Backstage, which was their equivalent to the Apple Genius Bar. And so I moved over and kept doing kind of that retail IT support sort of role, and more or less the same stuff I was doing at Geek Squad, just I would say less volume. And as part of that, which kind of ties into the story later on, I actually came out to San Diego for a 2-week training at Sony headquarters here in San Diego. So I did that, did the IT support stuff, some more. Eventually, I actually circled my way back around to Geek Squad because I had moved to a different part of Florida to actually start going back to college. I had basically had done 2 years, took a break, and then went back and finished it up. So went back to Geek Squad, did that whole thing over again, and then at that point, I really wanted to get into real IT and not just IT, just doing support for tons of people. I wanted to get involved in kind of the infrastructure stuff and the networking and the sysadmin type of stuff. So eventually, I ended up getting as part of my degree requirements, I did an internship that was unpaid at the university, but ultimately that led to a paid position, which was kind of the plan. Kind of had worked that out with the IT director there and kind of let him know that's what I wanted. It was to work there and that I would intern for free until something opened up. And then that's basically what happened. And so at that point, I was still doing IT support, but kind of around that time, which this was going to be about 2000, I think it was 2010 or somewhere around there, is when in my college curriculum, uh, I started to take security courses. And so, to back up a little bit, my degree was for information technology. And then I could choose a specialization if I wanted. I could focus on like IT management, I could focus on IT security. And then I think there may have been like a database security or like not even a database security, like database administration. And so I chose the security route because I saw on the course list there was like a forensics class, which looked cool. There was like an ethical hacking class. I'm like, oh man, that sounds really cool. But at that point, still, I had no idea like about cybersecurity. I was really kind of blind to it. And so as I started to get into the coursework a little bit more and actually started taking like those security courses, I became more interested in trying some of that stuff on an actual network and actually playing with some of those tools in a real world environment. And so I actually got permission from our network admin to, uh, I had permission to do vulnerability scans, which looking back on it, I did realize that those scans were the cause of some network outages. Um,
That's funny.
and part of that's my fault, and part of that is the network admin didn't really. I don't think he knew exactly what a vulnerability scan did at the packet level and how it could cause disruptions. And so I did that, and then also the as part of my senior project for my degree, I had to do something related to cybersecurity. And working with the network admin at the college, we came up with the idea of me deploying an IDS, a snort IDS, on the network because he had tried that previously and failed. Again, going back to kind of maybe not as knowledgeable as he probably should have been as a network admin, just being able to like deploy an IDS, but uh, put me in charge of that. So that's what I did. And looking back then, there was probably a lot of bad stuff going on that network that, again, I didn't necessarily realize as much back then, but looking back at some of the names of the signatures that were firing off, there was probably some really bad stuff going on.
That's funny, man.
Um,
Hey, yeah, this has been a really awesome story so far. I think that a lot of people probably can relate to. And um, two things I wanted to highlight from your story that stood out to me. I also got started doing kind of like IT support at my college, not at a company, but just doing standard IT support, desktop support is what it was called. And it's really bizarre, but it seemed like 90% of the calls were because someone got some crap commodity malware, right?
mhm.
And
Yep.
and I hadn't thought about it before, but you're right. You learn all of these things really in the sake of like making sure the university doesn't have to buy more equipment. Like they just want
Mhm.
to salvage the machine for as long as they possibly can.
Yeah.
So you learn stuff about, you know, malware persistence and like which registry keys you need to delete, but you're not at the time really thinking, or at least I wasn't, and you might not have been thinking
Mhm.
about how really you're going to be doing that in 15 years, except you're going to be looking at, you know, the latest, threat actor discovered by CrowdStrike, or you know what I mean? Like it's all
Yeah.
this just this giant ecosystem that equals the same. Um, it's just that's a really good point that you brought up. And I think for the part of the audience that's looking to break into security, I'll always tell them, and I would be curious to see what your thoughts are on this, but like getting that first IT support job if you have no experience is really critical.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, being really familiar with, um, well, specifically Windows systems. We deal with Linux a pretty good amount in incident response, but when it comes down to it, I think a majority of the malware we see is usually Windows based. It's an easy target. It has more market share for like end user use. So definitely getting into IT support is a great way to get familiar with really just computers in general and the Windows operating system and the different things that the Windows operating system is capable of and the different settings that are there. Because ultimately, when you get to security, it's going to be those settings and those things that you learn doing in support that you're going to be dealing with down the road. I guess you could kind of say that like you take in grade school you take these mathematic classes and um, you're like, why am I taking these? And for some people, they may not end up using some of the mathematical concepts they have to take in school that they're required to take. But a lot of people later down the road, those actually are directly applicable to what they're doing. Like, and I think kind of you can equate that to this help desk work as, it's fun at first, but it can be pretty draining. But
Right.
you kind of need to get those reps in and get that knowledge, and it is directly applicable to what you'll end up doing down the road when you get into more advanced sorts of roles.
Yeah. Yeah. And not to mention the customer support experience you get during that
Hmm.
time, right? But
Yeah.
we'll jump into that a little bit later. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that it seems like you really took kind of uh, you took a leading role in pursuing different opportunities, right? Like that I'll intern for free until a role opens up is a really um, unique scenario, or I guess a good way to do it, right? You were willing to make a sacrifice, perhaps, lifestyle wise, financially, or whatever, get that free experience and get into that role that let you do crazy stuff like vulnerability scan the network with no supervision, and learn
Yeah.
those things on a real network. Um, I just feel like that type of experience is super invaluable, especially when you're just learning.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing that I try to tell people that I've mentored in the past is like, don't wait until it's like your last semester in college to try to find internships and like find jobs. Like start planning for that stuff as soon as you start college, and try to get those internships in those fields where you're wanting to get your degree in, and go ahead and get that experience. Because if you can do those internships early on, by the time you graduate, I think a big problem with people graduating from college is that people don't hire them because they don't have experience. And it is hard to get your foot in the door if you don't have any experience on paper. But if you can get those internships early on, by the time you graduate college, you've got 4 years of real world experience to pair with your degree. And I think that's a huge benefit for people, and not just for security, but just in general,
Right.
just for any college graduates for sure.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So you graduate, you got your degree. What happens next?
Well, I haven't graduated yet.
Oh,
So I'm not going to skip forward that much because I need to get to kind of how the IR ties into this.
yeah, sure.
But one of the courses that I took as part of the college curriculum was actually like a computer forensics class. And a funny note is, and I'll touch on this later down the road, but my professor worked for Eyesight, and then down the road, I worked for FireEye, who had acquired Eyesight. So at one point, I actually was working with my forensics professor while I was at FireEye, which is pretty interesting looking down
Wow.
the road. But the computer forensics course was something that that was kind of uh, as far as like I knew was interested in security at this point because I was messing with IDSs and vulnerability scanning and the basic stuff. But when I took my computer forensics course, it was kind of like this is what I want to do in security. I thought I wanted to do like law enforcement forensic investigations, which I quickly found out that I didn't want to do that for a career. And but it was really cool. And so I actually got in touch with some of the TAs for those classes because they actually had some of the Weeby Tech right blockers, hardware right blockers. And I would actually, they actually basically just let me borrow them until they ever needed them for anything. And so I'm working this IT support role, like helping staff members and teachers and professors and stuff like that. But then when I'm back at my desk, I'm taking the disk drives out of the computers that got infected and like putting them into a hardware write blocker, like creating images of these drives and then actually doing the forensics and doing forensic timelines. Granted, not as well as I do now, but I was trying, um,
Yeah.
trying to follow documentation and stuff like that. And I was actually figuring out like how and when did this person get the malware on the computer, because that was a question that customers always asked when I worked at Geek Squad and at Sony was like, well, how did this get on my computer? And I had no idea.
Right.
Um, but eventually I learned like what things to look for, and so I was actually that's kind of where I got to the forensics piece. So I started doing forensics on every computer that came in to the from staff members and TAs and stuff like that, and actually getting more hands on with that. And that was kind of where I got my start forensics. And so kind of where my career went from here, I was at that path where I was about to graduate. I think it was like a semester before I was going to graduate, and I knew I wanted to do security. Um, and I was really open to just taking anything security related at this point. So I was willing to relocate wherever. I was applying all over the place, like DC, California, some places in Florida, like anywhere. I was willing to move,
Dude, let's
like anywhere.
let's let's talk about that for a second because that's also something I'm very big on. And in my career specifically, I've moved even to this day. I mean, I've moved from Virginia to Florida to Virginia to California to northern, southern California. Like being open to relocation just unlocks almost unlimited opportunity within the security space. Would you
Definitely.
agree with that?
Yeah, I would say for sure. I think that's a huge benefit if you're willing or able to make that sacrifice and be willing to move wherever that initial job is to get your foot in the door. I think for me, it was a little bit easier because obviously I was really young, so I didn't have a family or anything like that, and my extended family are kind of scattered in different states, and so there wasn't really any. I wasn't born in Florida, and I had only been there at that time. It was for eventually ended up being 15 years, which is a long time, but still, like, the only people that lived in Florida were my parents. Everyone else lived elsewhere. And
Right.
so it was a little bit easier for me just to pick up and be able to leave, I think, than it may be other people that, a lot of people, their whole family is located in one area and they don't want to leave there. And I can respect that. But I think it'll definitely broaden your chances and probability of landing that job you want if you're willing to relocation for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I like to talk about what makes people happy on this show too. And, if being away from your core group of friends or your family isn't going to make you happy in the long run, that's not something that I would push,
Hmm.
but if you're looking to get fulfillment from your career and the options that you have there, unfortunately, it's just a fact. You're not going to have as many opportunities, especially just starting or even in like junior mid-level roles to do things like remote work right at the beginning. Or, I mean, nowadays it's a little bit different, obviously, with
Yeah.
COVID, but
Hmm.
um, if that's really what you're looking for in your career to make you happy, um, having that willingness to relocate is a good thing, I think. But
Definitely.
anyway, yeah, so keep going.
All right. So I was applying everywhere, trying to figure out where, I was going to move anywhere I could get the job. So I applied a ton of places. I interviewed at some places. I think one of the highlights of that was I applied to be like a junior pen tester, and I had never done pen testing before. And looking back, that was a disaster because I had to do a hands-on like assessment, and I had never like really hacked anything other than playing around with Wi-Fi. I like cracked a WEP network, wireless network, and got the key for it. Um, so that was kind of a disaster. But anyways, I wasn't able to get a job in security. I couldn't find an entry level role, like a junior role, an associate role. Because this would have been 2012, I believe, and I think this was right before there was a really big boom in in like security hiring, and a lot of people weren't really at that point still weren't really doing security. It was kind of like something that was still kind of fresh for a lot of companies, and
Right.
definitely not as prominent as it was now. And so it didn't work out, and I ended up taking another like a senior level sort of IT support role somewhere else. And I honestly, as much as I loved that working in that other role, I love the people I worked with. Like to this day, I think I haven't enjoyed the people I've worked with as much as I did for those 6 months at this healthcare company.
Wow.
But I just didn't want to do the support stuff anymore, and so I applied at two places just to see what would happen. So I applied at a the NSA actually, and this was pre Snowden like
Yeah.
leak, and then
Everyone
I
thought that was cool.
yeah, and then I applied at Sony because they had like a SOC position, and I think it was originally what I applied for was a position in Virginia at the Sony like USA headquarters, which is in I don't remember exactly where it's at. I think it's
Somewhere in Northern
Virginia.
Virginia, right?
Yeah, somewhere over there. And lo and behold, I actually had got offers from both. I flew out for interviews for both and got offers for both. And uh, and comparing the offers, and then in between my interview and then receiving an offer from the NSA as when the Snowden stuff happened, and I'm like, nah, that's not going to be a good place for me to go right now.
Oh man,
And
that's crazy.
I'm like, no, I don't. I actually got two offers from them. I got another offer from them after I had already taken the Sony job, but basically, I ended up getting the Sony job for just being a SOC analyst, like a level one SOC analyst. And that was really my start into the security field. And that's kind of where I started and learned about like packets and crafting like IDS signatures and looking at logs and all your basic security analyst sort of steps and looking at alerts. And I got a lot of that knowledge. And then there was at one point, depending on what kind of SOC you're in, it can be pretty mundane and pretty kind of just rinse and repeat every single shift. And this was also a 24/7 operation. So I was working night shift a lot. And eventually I got to a point where it was like, this night shift is killing me. Like, I don't know if I can physically do this anymore. And the work was getting really mundane. And I was making, I was finding like security problems and incidents and fraud and stuff like that. And I don't think that it was taken as serious as I thought it should have. And so um, basically I was doing all this extra work outside of my normal job duties, trying to hunt stuff,
Mm.
and we just didn't have the resources to look into it or take action on it. So it was like, well, I'm kind of tired of doing the same thing. And so I ended up getting a job as I think it was a security analyst position, but it was with a defense contractor. And not only was it just reviewing alerts and a SIM, but it was also doing like incident response and doing forensics and managing, like actually doing the security engineering for the IDS and
Mm.
kind of a little bit of everything and getting
Are
more
you still
hands
in
on.
Florida?
No, this was San Diego. Sorry, when I took the
Gotcha.
Sony job, I moved out to San Diego, so that was kind of where earlier it tied in. I ended up working in the
Right.
same building that I had worked with, that I had been to like previously
For the training.
for the training, and
Yeah.
this would have been like five 5 years later, is I had circled back around and came back, and
Do you
so
think,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, do you think that your prior experience at Sony played a role in getting that position at all? Or do you think enough time had kind of passed to where, you know, that wasn't really a consideration?
I don't think it was. I think it looked good on like paper, like, oh, he's worked
Yeah.
for Sony before, but it
Maybe
was
it
for
got you a phone call.
yeah, it was completely separate. So it was like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm still friends with the person who hired me. We're actually pretty good friends, and um, yeah, I don't think that played a role in me getting that job.
Well, if you
But
needed any validation, you also got two offers from the NSA. So
yeah, exactly. So
that's awesome, man. Yeah. Real quick, you mentioned you're still friends. Networking's everything within cybersecurity.
definitely,
So, who knows, 2, 6, 10 years from now, maybe you work at Sony again. Like, these are just the way
yeah.
things work, right?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. Yeah, that's another thing that I want to bring home too, is networking is huge to get your foot in the door in those initial positions. If you're just getting started, for me, it was 20. I think when I was initially looking for a position, I think it was 20. I guess it was 2012. And so again, there weren't many junior level positions out there, and also the area I was in, there wasn't really a security community there. So there wasn't very many people to network with on the at a security level, because a lot of people weren't even really doing they didn't have like security roles. It was just the network administrator managing like firewall rules, and that was a lot of people, that was the extent that they of their
right.
security, or like like Symantec endpoint or something like that
Yeah.
that they had on their computers for compliance. Um, but if you're in a area that does have security communities or groups that meet up monthly or quarterly, I think that's a huge win if you can start like becoming friends with those people and letting them know, because uh, what you're interested in. Because even if they don't have a position open, they may have the budget to be able to create a position for you for like an associate role, or maybe they can move you into their IT department with a plan to groom you into a security role, like next budget cycle, when they can open up a rec for that sort of position, and then they can kind of slide you right in. So
Yeah.
networking is huge to be able to kind of get your foot in the door as well.
Yeah. And I don't care if you're working at the bakery baking bread from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. You know, if you have a passion for security and you go to these things, I don't think anyone really cares about what you do outside of that. Like, as long as you're showing the initiative, you're learning, when you're not working, um, your advice applies equally to that person as it does to, um, you know, someone working in an IT support role, or, your current role.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the security community in general is very open, and I found that people love sharing knowledge and sharing what they know with people that are interested, and regardless of your background, but if you have an interest in it, definitely. I mean, you're more than welcome at. And the security community is small as well, so I think everyone will definitely get a welcoming feeling if they go to any events. So if you're worried about going because you don't know a lot, don't worry. Go there, learn, soak up as much as you can, and there'll be people willing to share.
Absolutely. So where do we go next?
All right, so we are at a defense contractor doing security work, and eventually that led me into doing responding to like real world APT incidents and dealing with attacks on from foreign governments. And that's at the point where I really got started dealing with real incidents and not just someone trying to hack a website. Like it was apts trying to steal information and having like their own backdoors, not just using metasploit, trying to get in. And so at that point, is when I really started getting into real incident response and actually doing forensics and doing incident response investigations and doing IR containments, and and really getting into a lot of those technical skills that um, ultimately that brought me into Mandiant. So I enjoyed doing the security work where I was at, but I wanted more incidents. Like I wanted to do more excitement and not just kind of the not as much downtime. I didn't want to have to go in and be tuning IDS rules. I wanted to be doing the cool stuff all the time. And I got contacted by FireEye or and Mandiant. I think they were one company at that point, and essentially I got an offer to work at Mandiant Consulting. And one thing that I think did help was my relationship with the person who hired me at Sony ended up actually being my manager at Mandiant, my first manager at Mandiant. And while he didn't have a direct, uh, I don't think he didn't have any hand in getting me the interview there, but he was my person I was reporting to. So he ultimately had feedback on whether or not I was going to get that job. And I think it definitely helped. I think my skill sets helped. I knew the FireEye products. I had dealt with like real APT incidents, and I knew the manager knew that my work ethic was very strong and that I was productive. And eventually I got that position at Mandiant. And then I think at that point it's kind of history. Like I spent over 4 years there doing like incident response all day, every day, and worked my way up to a senior level position. And then I was at a point where I was going to be making the jump from a senior position to a principal position. And then ultimately, I actually made a vertical move over at Crowdstrike, which I won't go into specifics on this about why some of the reasons why I chose to leave, but
Sure.
I am very happy at CrowdStrike, and it was a vertical move for me and a very strategic move to start moving my way into management and directorship and stuff like that. So that's eventually where I went, and that's where I'm at now. And if there's any specifics you want me to go into, more than happy to do that.
Yeah, no, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I think just hearing everything from, your start at Geek Squad to where you are working at CrowdStrike and with, some of these industry leaders, Mandiant and CrowdStrike, is just it's inspiring to me. And I think it'll be inspiring to a lot of other people. One of the things that I'd like to just point out is that you had patience. you know, we're talking about back in 2012 to where you are now. You put in the hours, having that opportunity at Mandiant to really hone your skills, work day in and day out. on IR engagements sounds to me like really the proving grounds, like where you're just grinding, really honing your skills, getting that real world, like battle tested kind of experience, right?
Yeah.
Um, and, it'd be really interesting to talk about like the individual scenarios that really helped, build your skill sets. But I'm sure,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know how much we can talk about that stuff, but like, was there a specific engagement that like really tested you or kind of took you to the next level?
I to be honest, there's different levels of incident response engagements. You've got some with smaller clients. You have, a couple thousand endpoints, and you have clients who are very big and have like tens of thousands of endpoints. And to be completely honest, when you're dealing with these customers on an incident response engagement, regardless of the size of their environment, you're typically only interacting with a handful of people from that company, and regardless of the size of their environment, the interaction is really the same between the two, and they're. I would honestly say, like, a smaller project is not it's not that much less stressful than a bigger project would be, like, as far as size goes, because ultimately everything is going to be the same. What we're doing from an investigative perspective is scalable, both at CrowdStrike and at my experience at Mandiant. And so the level of stress is really kind of equal. So that was one interesting thing that I picked up through my time doing the incident response. The other thing that I think was, as far as things that helped me from my past in incident response, is definitely that customer service sort of experience at working at Geek Squad. And before I had actually gotten to Geek Squad, I was actually doing like computer sales in the computer department at Best Buy as an in between before I could kind of prove my worth to get into Geek Squad. And so really that, interacting with customers, and when you're in incident response, you've got people with their jobs on the line, you've got millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars at stakes, and damages. Their customers are complaining, their employees are complaining because all their systems are encrypted with ransomware, and the website's down. And so it's a lot of high stress, and the biggest thing was is the soft skills, and knowing how to deal with those kind of tense clients, and being able to kind of ground them and really help them organize and come up with a plan, and the different phases of the plan, and giving them tasks to work on towards that plan. I think really uh, that experience back then in Geek Squad and dealing with those people and being able to calm them down, I directly equated that to dealing with customers here. um, that it's the soft skills are huge, and really calming clients down and keep them under control, and focusing on the investigation.
Yeah, dude, that's great. I'm kind of glad we went there because um, I also work in incident response, but I don't work in uh, consulting. I'm sitting on internal security teams focusing on the incident response process, and a lot of times when things get major, we call people like you in almost 100% of the time to help. But you really hit something that I believe in as well, which is just that ability to talk and the soft skills. Um, Incident response, and I'm going to ask you this in a second. What how you define incident response, but incident response is constantly like fighting fires, right? Like we're almost like narcissists in a way. Like we like to be in those high stress situations. We like to be figuring out what's going wrong and not just on a test machine, like literally, in a battle scenario.
Mhm.
And I often find myself kind of like, you never want an incident to occur, but it's like, all right, well, I'm ready to go. Like,
Yeah.
let's respond to something. Um, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is if you're looking to be a leader in the incident response space, the ability to still maintain that level of soft skill and like, the ability to strategically think in the heat of the moment and really guide people towards a specific objective, right? Because there's different phases of the incident response process, and you need to get to one place before you can get to the next. And oftentimes a lot of people can't focus on what that objective is. So it's really kind of one of your primary roles is to come in and say, guys, this is what we need to focus on. Here's how we get there,
Mhm.
right? So any comments on that? But also, I did want to ask you what just kind of your general definition of incident responses.
Yeah, so I could definitely touch on my definition of incident response. So typically when people ask me what I do, I try to break it down into an easy way for the layperson to understand what I do. Something bad happens, I get hired to go in and figure out what happened, and then I advise my client on what they can do to help keep that from happening again. And so that's my definition of incident response as it relates to my job. But really, a more generic definition would be, man, that is a tough question.
I know, and that's kind of why I'm asking, right?
um,
Because
yeah.
it's I think it means different things to different people,
Hmm.
and it's a good point. You pointed out, right, that in your world it's something, right? Because you're a consultant, you come in to do a very specific thing in that, you don't necessarily your company is not the one that was, is not operating because something occurred. You're coming in because you've dealt with a bunch of these things before, so you kind of have that vision of, oh, I've seen this before, here's where we should go next.
Hmm.
And you're really trying to get, that value into the scenario. But like for me, I think a lot about uh, the triage, the getting things to containment, the eradicating the threat, like those kind of phases of the incident response process, um, on top of building the internal relationships required to do those things effectively, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit on it there is really the all the preparation that goes into place outside of an active incident, and like you said, having those relationships with the other departments and IT and the business as well. And so I guess incident response, the one thing that we say in incident response is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so I think, um, when it comes to instant response, I think the biggest portion of that is your preparation and the things that you can do. So when something does happen, you can quickly respond to it. You can quickly contain it. You can quickly get remediated from it, and you can efficiently and accurately take the findings during the analysis and investigation and apply those to your existing, whether it's tool set, policies, procedures, etc. Apply those things to help make your process even more efficient, in the
Right.
future, and taking those lessons learned.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll tell a quick story. I recently got an intern, essentially in my current role as the incident response lead, and um, you know, incident response, when you think about it and we talk about it, sounds really sexy. It's this firefighting, it's this, craziness. But especially on an internal security team, that's not happening
Hmm.
24/7. If it was, that would be really bad.
Yes.
Um, so I found, when I was explaining to this, I was getting fired up, and it's like, okay, what are we doing next? Oh, we're actually preparing nonstop. Like it's when you start talking about that, it's a lot of building relationships. It's a lot of, writing the plan of attack and how we classify things, and when to engage certain people, making sure everyone's on board. So I just thought I'd bring that up because it was an interesting, like, introspective kind of like situation that I was thrown into, where I see
Yeah.
this bright young person who's ready to jump into the fray, and I tell him,
Like, sorry.
It'll happen one day, probably, but for now we're just gonna write a playbook.
Yeah.
um, it's funny, man.
And that's one thing I love about consulting is, all that stuff is good, and I like to see my clients doing all of the preparing, but as a consultant, I don't have to do that stuff directly, which is kind of fun because I just get to go in and fight the battle, and I don't have to worry about a lot of the preparation, which is nice. It obviously makes for
Sure.
a more stressful job, but it's also pretty exciting and definitely passes the time for sure.
Yeah. So we talked about the soft skills, for people out there who are practicing incident response right now, whether it's on a small team in a stock environment just because they have to play that dual role, or if they're in a large organization that has a very specific incident response team meshed with a couple other things. I mean, there's a lot of ways the industry kind of builds that rollout, I think. What were some actual skills on the technical side that helped you move from like your first incident response role to your mid-level to like where you are? And I think, I'll kind of speak ahead for you a little bit. I think that the soft skills are maybe what got you more from like senior to principal, because like
Mm,
that's where they become more important, especially getting into management and things like that.
yeah,
But like before that, when you were, you know, a baby in incident response, what were you really focusing your time on to kind of take yourself to the next level?
yeah, definitely. I think one of those things is it's really different for every person, but I think the biggest thing is finding a workflow that works the most efficient for you. Because I mean, specifically with consulting, we're dealing with a lot of large environments and a lot of data and a lot of systems that have to be analyzed, and finding kind of your own kind of workflow to prioritize, what should I look for first for those quick wins,
Mm,
and then like what other things should I hunt for that aren't, probably didn't get picked up by some sort of signature or something like that, and what can I look for that may kind of unveil some of that suspicious activity. And and I think that was the one thing specific to consulting that I really had to get into is, and even when I wasn't in consulting, once you do a few incidents, you start kind of realizing like at your first incident, you don't know where to start. You've got like your sim that has all these logs in it. You've got your endpoint protection has these alerts. You've got your firewall kicking off these alerts, and you don't really know what to look at first. And I
mm,
think as time goes on, um, you start to learn like which things to prioritize. And I think that's the biggest thing for
yeah,
me that I've picked up. And part of that is just getting those reps and real incidents, and then eventually you kind of find, like naturally you find what works best for you. And every
right.
person's different, like the way that their brains work. Maybe it's difficult for them to stare at lines of like log entries, and maybe it's easier for them to visualize things, so they use graphs or something like that. So it's all different for everybody for sure.
Right. Yeah. So just to summarize, it sounds like, you know, you obviously have those core skill sets of like log analysis, you know, understanding of core operating system fundamentals and like file system stuff, right?
Yeah,
Um, but what you're saying, especially in a consultancy world, is, and I, speaking from my experience in not consulting, I'd say this is equally true, but becoming more efficient in your process in general, right? Like improving
yeah,
the way you think and just being faster and smarter and more efficient in the way you respond to things is important, because at the end of the day, incident response is kind of a speed game, right? Like
for sure.
stop
And
the bleeding as fast as you can, right?
yeah, and I think to clarify like what I was saying earlier, it's now that I've had a second to think about it, is to learn where your higher fidelity evidence is going to come from, and starting there to get those initial indicators of compromise and being able to apply those. And basically, the more you can find up front, you can kind of help stop the bleeding quicker that way, and then find those other leads to other activity within your network. But if you can start at the highest fidelity, like source you have of information, and then you can work your way down and start digging through some of that other stuff. So it's really just finding out where your quick wins are, because that's ultimately where you want to start with some sort of lead, and then you can follow the breadcrumb trails from there to kind of scope the full incident.
Right. No, that's awesome. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about incident response career and more, the career itself, and specifically an incident response consultant, um, and the lifestyle, right? So talk to me a little bit about, I know you've probably touched on some of it, but you know, what is the lifestyle like for an IR consultant? Like for me, if I were to make a jump, hey, you got any openings? You hire me. What should I expect going from an internal security team moving into like a consultant role?
I think there's gonna be a lot of like discomfort. You're gonna be put out of your comfort zone for sure. You're gonna be dealing with clients who are paying you a lot of money to help them through an incident, and this is all the time. It's not maybe we have a couple incidents a year. You're dealing with it every day, and so at first there's going to be a lot of discomfort, and that I think if you can own it and be like, you know what, I'm a little bit nervous, but I know if I get pumped up and kind of push through this first one, the next time is going to be that much easier. And that's something that I still struggle with that today. Like every time I go into a new engagement with a new customer, a lot of the times when you're doing, yeah, one of the things with the lifestyle as a consultant is you're usually dealing with multiple clients at one time,
Hmm.
which can be difficult to handle and overwhelming sometimes. But it's really knowing how to task those things to other people, which is something you kind of more do when you get up into that leadership sort of role. You're able to task things out, and then that opens you up to work on multiple projects. As when you're just starting, you're normally focusing on one project, and then you're normally not having to interact with the clients at all or anything like that. You're just doing whatever the project manager is telling you to do. But even to this day, as a being a project manager, um, uh, usually I'm handling multiple projects, but at some point I get to the point where the fires died down at the client's site, and it becomes kind of a routine for a couple of weeks, where it's just kind of doing some analysis and reporting our findings. And you kind of have a chance to calm down, and then you get put on another project where the house is on fire again, and you kind of get that feeling back. So it's kind of a reoccurring cycle. It never really goes away, but I think you still go into it with some confidence, because the more that you've done, the more confident you are. And I still get that nervousness every time, but it quickly goes away. Once you get on that call and start talking, it's just like riding a bike basically at that point. And
Instinct takes over.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So that's the one thing with consultants. It's a lot of multitasking. My advice to people in incident response consulting is, yeah, don't be afraid to say no to things if you're getting overwhelmed. Like there's a high burnout rate in incident response consulting, because you're dealing with active incidents all the time. So like it's always kind of crazy. The house is always on fire. There's people upset. There's a lot going on, and I think you have to know your own boundaries, and and don't be afraid to say no to taking on another project. If you're overwhelmed because you're working on two or three things, and somebody asked you, if, hey, can you help on this? Like, don't don't be afraid to say no, because ultimately, if you overwhelm yourself, you're gonna burn yourself out. But at the same token, uh, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and say yes to things, even if you're not 100% comfortable. Um, so you have to find that balance, I think, and don't be afraid to set those boundaries.
Right. Yeah. So great advice. I think it applies outside of consultancy as well. If you're at risk of not achieving goals that you've set for yourself, or, if your initiatives are at risk because, you're overtaxed or whatever, you know, saying no to things is a really good idea because you're going to end up setting yourself up for failure. But at the same time, if you have cycles, if you're willing to push yourself a little bit extra, you know, like for instance, going all the way back to that IT job in college, like, hey, I'll deploy that IDS. Same thing applies to a principal consultant. Hey, yeah, I'll take a stab at the budget. I'll take a stab. You know what I mean? Like just to get that
Yeah.
extra experience and broaden your horizon a little bit.
Yeah.
So um so last thing, where do you want to go in your career? This is something that I knew that I think I want to try, because you're a principal consultant now. You mentioned, management directorship, and you have that drive to be a leader in the industry type thing. Um, where are you going, and how do how are you positioning yourself? Like, what are you working on personally to get there?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, I think my goal is ultimately uh, to get into like the management, and uh, that's really more of managing people and less technical, hands-on sort of things. And one thing that I've found is, while I like the technical stuff, I like interacting with people more and really helping groom people. And it's not just dealing with people. Like, I'm an introvert and I'm not the most social person like outside of work, but I enjoy mentoring people, and I think that that gives me a lot of joy. And I like to see people develop and move up in their careers, and really being a manager and managing people new to the industry. And it's very joyful. It's also it's less stress if I'm not dealing with as many like hands-on technical stuff going on. I like right now you're as a principal sort of consultant position, and you're kind of in that role where you're kind of having to do both. You're managing people, but then you're also responsible for being hands-on and being kind of the technical lead for a lot of things. And I kind of want to move into more of the soft skills sort of
Right.
area, and that's kind of where I see myself going. So, and consulting, what that looks like is managing other consultants and managing their assignments and stuff like that, and developing their careers. But then also a lot of it is project management for engagements as well, and dealing with more of the kind of the business side of things and the contracts and the billing and all that stuff. So that's kind of where I'm moving into right now, and that feels comfortable for me. My family comes from really kind of that business side. Like they worked in. My stepdad started as like a basically a delivery driver for a company, and worked his way up to be like the GM of one of their plants and handling all aspects of the entire business.
Hmm.
And one thing that was always kind of inspiring to me was, and not only did he like run the entire business, uh, from all aspects. But if a delivery driver called out and there was no one to replace them, he would go out himself and like make the deliveries. So he's like the guy, like he's like wearing a suit, like in the office taking business calls. But then, one day of the week he might be out there in his suit, like driving the delivery trucks and delivering the things, like the linens to people. So that's kind of where I kind of see myself, and that's an environment I grew up in, is kind of that management, uh, kind of this management roles, and I'm comfortable being in that business setting. And like my mom was an accountant, so I just kind of grew up in that business setting, and that's kind of where I see myself going. But at the end of the day, if I need to hop in and do that technical analysis and give those technical briefings, like I'll know what was
Right.
involved there. So that's kind of where I'm looking at right now. Timeline wise, I'm not sure. I just started at Crowdstrike, but I'm hoping within the next 2 years I can move up into a manager sort of role, and kind of start that track. And then where I go from there, I'm not sure. I can only look down the road. Like my career and life in general changes so much every couple of years that who knows what's going to happen in a couple of years.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like my next step right now. And
Awesome.
so, but part of the preparation for that is leading more and more projects, um, and and then starting to get some direct reports for myself to that report to me that I manage. So
Very
it's kind of
cool.
where I'm at right now, working my way up to management.
That's awesome, man. I think you have some really cool role models to look up to. And, if, eating your own dog food as a manager sounds like a really good idea. I think people appreciate that, you know, um, and then I think that'll go a long way to making you successful in that space.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, So this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's good to reconnect with you. We've worked together in the past. Sounds like everything's going really well for you, and I wish you nothing but continued success. Um, is there anything you kind of wanted to close out with? Where people can find you, what you're doing these days, or anything like that?
Yeah, I've got a well, I had a blog. I'm kind of in the transition period of because I changed jobs, I decided I was going to kind of change up my blog that I was doing, but I was doing a blog called Breaking Into Security, and I'm eventually going to turn that into solely like uh, a streaming channel on Twitch to basically play video games and help answer people's questions about infosec and IR in general. So you can find me at twitch.tv/breaking into security. I'm also on Twitter at breaking into sec, I believe is the handle there. And that's also on Facebook at breaking into security as well. So you guys can all find me there.
Sweet, man. That's I remember when you told me that I was shocked that you actually got that name. And you also had a really sweet hoodie or jacket that I saw
Hmm.
you wearing one
Yeah.
time. So maybe one day you'll sell those. But that was pretty sweet looking. Um, Mike, yeah, thanks again, man. If you guys want to hook up with Mike, check him out at Breaking Into Security on Twitch. Um, I'm a gamer too, so I'll probably stop by, come hang out one of these days. But thank you again. Thank you for everyone who watched. You can find this episode. Well, if you're listening to it, you already know where it is. But feel free to visit www.infoseksidekick.com for all past episodes. They're on YouTube. They're on LinkedIn. They're everywhere on all the podcasting platforms. Looking forward to continuing these types of conversations. We have some really cool guests lined up. So stay tuned, subscribe, do what you got to do, and have a great week.
Yep. Thanks, Travis. Thanks, everyone.